Hey guys, welcome to or back to my YouTube channel. Today I thought I would do a video to help any year 12 students or year 13 students who might be studying English literature and need help with how to annotate their set text. So I did Alevel English literature and we had a section on drama, prose and poetry. I also took psychology and geography, so if you want any tips for those two subjects, let me know. But yeah, I'm going to split this video into parts. So I'll do one for each section, drama, prose and poetry. Then I'll also do a section for general tips and resources that you can use in your English A-level to help you out. If you find this helpful, please subscribe. I'll probably try and post a shorter form video of this on my TikTok, so if you want to see it in short form, go check it out. But yeah, let's just get into it. So I'm going to start off with our prose texts because these were the ones that I annotated in the book most, and I think this will be the most helpful for me explaining my annotations. We were doing Science and Society for our prose section, and we did The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells and The Handmaid's Tale by Margaret Atwood. I was honestly using pretty simple equipment, so I just used a pack of tabs and some highlighters, and I literally just had a multi-pack of tabs from Amazon. I think it cost like £6, and I basically used one throughout the entirety of my A-level, as in one pack of these, and I still have loads left, so definitely worth getting. So what I did for both books was along the top of the books I tabbed every single chapter, just because this helped me flip between the chapters a bit easier and find what I was looking for in the book. For The Handmaid's Tale I didn't use any specific colours. I think I just picked blue and purple because it looked nice with the cover. But doing this again, something I would say is maybe tab the night sections in a different colour to the day sections. And then for War of the Worlds I did colour code it, and I used a lighter blue for book 1 and then a different blue for book 2. Honestly, it's more of a green for book 2, but yeah. And then down the side of the book I would put the tabs for key moments and scenes that I wanted to come back to. Obviously I used just blue ones for this book, and I tried to pick themes that worked throughout the topic of science and society. So for War of the Worlds I did environment, foreshadowing, key quotations and religion. Key quotations was just good ones to remember, and then obviously the others were directly related to those themes. And then I'm going to cover this because I had to put some details on in case I lost my book. But for The Handmaid's Tale I used the themes for religion, women, men, identity, science and nature and environment. Honestly, prose ended up being my weakest section of the papers in the actual exam according to the mark breakdown, but I kind of knew that before I got the mark breakdown anyway, because I came out of the exam thinking, oh my goodness, what did I just write? Our question ended up being on friendship, which if you've read the books you will understand why that's a pretty difficult thing to compare between the two texts. General tips for the prose paper, I would say just maybe memorize a couple of key quotes, just because it can be quite hard, especially in The Handmaid's Tale, to flick through and find the quotes that you are trying to look for, that you're thinking of in the actual exam. I do have the books that they used in the exam, like the ones they give to you. I would recommend doing that because if you're looking for a specific quote in the exam, you kind of know what the page already looks like, you know whereabouts in the book it was from when you were reading it. It just helps a lot more when you're in the exam if you get the actual text that they're going to be using. And you can ask your teacher what specific copies they're going to use in the exam, and I'm sure they'll tell you because that's what our teacher did. I did do that for all of my texts as well. I got all of the copies that they would be using in the exam just to make it a bit easier for myself. Okay, moving on to drama. We studied Othello and A Streetcar Named Desire, and in terms of tabs I didn't do a whole ton of tabbing. I just kind of did very basic tabbing, and I did more in-depth written annotations. So for A Streetcar Named Desire I just tabbed where every single scene was, and I used the same colour for all the scenes just because that's what I chose to do. And then for Othello I did a similar thing of tabbing every single scene, except the only thing I did differently was I used different colour tabs for each act, just so it was a bit easier to find where I was looking for. So for Act 2 I used this grey colour, and then for Act 3 I used a green. It just helped me to differentiate a bit more, and it helps a lot when you're revising if you're trying to look for specific scenes. Then for actual annotations I just used highlighters and a regular biro pen. Highlighters I used were the zebra mild liners. These are really good for annotating any book because they tend to not bleed through the page. I did find during my A-levels whenever I tried to annotate using a different highlighter it would bleed through the page, so zebra mild liners are really good. I didn't use any specific colour codes while highlighting. That was just a personal choice. You could do that, but I just didn't really find it useful. Obviously Shakespeare can be a bit harder to understand, so I just kind of annotated what each line meant and the connotations of that, and then what the technique was. So for example, when Cassio says, "Make love's quick pants and Desdemona's ask, give renewed fire to our extinct spirits and bring all Cyprus comfort," it's a grand euphemism for sex, an elevated view of intimacy. At the same time, it celebrates romantic union, and this juxtaposes when Iago calls Othello a black ram and when he calls Desdemona a white youth. Even just things like, he hath achieved and made that Paragon's description and wild fame is a hyperbole. So I just kind of annotated very simple things. In some places I would go in a bit more detail on what those things meant. Obviously for Othello we were marked on AO5 as well, which is critical quotes, and I will put some sources or good critics to use on screen. For me it wasn't really useful to take external notes for my drama text unless it was about context. For Othello I did do a bit more writing outside of the book, but not too much honestly for either drama. And the app that I used for any kind of notes on a computer, well, it was actually on my iPad, but it was GoodNotes. GoodNotes is genuinely the best app that I used throughout A-levels. I didn't really like using Word or Google Docs. This isn't an ad, by the way, I'm just saying it was really helpful. It's literally what I used the whole time, and I used it a lot for poetry, which I will get onto in a minute. But yeah, so it's a really good app. Something I would say for Shakespeare, especially because, as I said, it can be a bit harder to understand what is actually being said when you're first reading it. This is a copy that we were going to use in the exam, but I've just looked for it, I actually can't find it, but I did use another copy of Othello. I'll put it on the screen, but it basically had kind of translations of modern meanings of what was being said, which I found really helpful, and I know quite a few people in my class did the same thing of using two different texts, because using this one you can find your place in the book a lot easier, but using the other one it helps you understand a lot easier, and they often have pre-written annotations, which helps out quite a lot. In terms of annotating streetcar, something I found quite useful was these post-it notes that you could like lay on top that was see-through. It just gives you more space for annotations, especially when the lines are quite close together. It just means you can kind of put a lot more information in. Again, for streetcar I didn't really use any kind of specific color code for different quotes. I just used whatever highlighters I thought worked. For smaller like punctuation that I wanted to know, I would use yellow, but besides that I literally just used any color. A good thing about streetcar is it has a lot of space on the pages, so at the end of each scene I would kind of write down key points and just like what needed to be said context wise, or a kind of summary of the scene. Something I would recommend doing, especially for streetcar but also just for Othello as well, and also any of the other texts this can be helpful, is creating mind maps. I'll put a photo of one that I did for my A-levels up here, but if you put a theme in the middle, so for example, let's say jealousy in Othello, so you put jealousy in the middle, and then you would put the key characters that it affects the most, and then branching off of them you would put a quote and then how it affects them in that scene. That's a really useful way of revising, and it really helped me, and it's good for character studies, especially in streetcar. That's a good revision technique to use. I'm sure you've been told to do that already, but it is a really useful one. And then moving on to poetry. I did most of my poetry annotations on GoodNotes, and how I would do that is I would either go on Poetry Foundation for the English romantic verse, or I would just find any kind of written version of the poetry online, so Genius has a lot of them, or I did end up buying the ebook for, I believe it was the English Romantics one, and I would just copy paste the entire poem and put it onto GoodNotes, and that allows you to kind of make a lot more space around the actual poem to annotate, because something I struggled with using the book was that there's barely any space around the poem for your annotation. As you can see, I did put some tabs in, and that was just so that I could find the poems better, so I used different colours for each poet. So I used this colour for William Blake and a slightly darker colour for Wordsworth, and this just helped me when I was revising, similar as the other ones, to find where the actual poems were in the text. This is the copy that they used in our exam, so that was really helpful. So yeah, I didn't write many of the annotations in the actual book for English Romantics, and I mainly used GoodNotes. I did use Genius a lot for annotations. They have some really good pre-written ones, although I would say anyone can add anything to Genius, so just be aware to take what you read with a pinch of salt. I also used lit charts right before the exam, and that really helped me with my English Romantic verse poetry. The lit charts annotations helped because they had a lot more kind of niche techniques I found. Like there were some things that I had literally never heard of until like a week before the exam that were all on lit charts, and they ended up really helping me in the actual exam, so that is definitely a good one. You do have to pay for it. I think a subscription for a year might have been like $14.99, and I think I just paid for it and then cancelled it like the day after the exam, and I think pretty sure I got a refund as well, but I would recommend getting it a bit sooner and using that because it was really helpful. And then for poems of the decade, again, I put tabs in where every single one of the poems were. And I did color code the highlighting and annotations in this book a bit more. It just helped me to differentiate the kind of themes in my head. So for example, Simon Armitage's Chainsaw versus the Pampas Grass, I used yellow and pink annotations, and that kind of signified masculine terminology versus feminine terminology. Also for An Easy Passage, I used pink, orange and yellow, just because I felt they were quite like girly, childlike colours almost, which I know is so stereotypical, but it really helped me kind of remember the themes of the poetry. I did this for a lot of them, like for Giuseppe I used blue colours, same for A Minor Role. In Please Hold I regularly alternated between purple and pink, just basically anything to kind of get the theming of the poetry in my head in any way, because I think my main struggle with the poetry was there's so much of it to cover, and when your exams are all closer together it does make it harder to revise every single poem back to front, and obviously you're revising it throughout the course of the year, but personally last minute revision is what suits me best. So it wouldn't have mattered that I revised a bunch of Keats poems in January really hard and then went back to them a couple of times, because what sticks in my head is what I do in the weeks leading up to the actual exam. Helpfully poetry was our last exam, but obviously that might not be the case for you, so if that sort of thing would help you with the colours, definitely do that. In terms of coursework, obviously everyone does different texts. I did The Yellow Wallpaper and The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. Obviously The Yellow Wallpaper is Charlotte Perkins Gilman. I'm gonna try and find my copies of that really quickly just so I can show you what I did, but basically my Yellow Wallpaper annotations were a lot more in depth. My The Little Stranger annotations were a lot worse, and I barely used any tabs, barely annotated it, and I did a lot more kind of revision and work for that on my iPad through typing and research. Obviously for coursework you're kind of doing it on your own, so it's very different to in class. It wouldn't be the same as kind of taking notes in the book for drama, because I was listening to what the teacher was saying and writing it down alongside the quotes, whereas you can't do that for coursework. So that's why I'm not going to do like a whole section on it. I just want to show you what I did kind of. Also just quickly, this was the other copy of Othello that I used. I found it. It basically has like a glossary at the bottom of every single page, so it is very, very good for understanding what is being said. Anyways, so for The Little Stranger, as you can see, I tabbed where every chapter was. I did that for most of my books. It was so helpful, just in terms of finding your way through the books, especially in a thicker book like this. I believe there's about 500 pages in this, and it was so difficult to get through for me personally, but that definitely helps, especially when going back to it when I was writing my coursework. In terms of tabbing, I rarely tabbed anything. Honestly, that worked better for me for this, because I just tabbed the moments that I was writing about in my coursework, and where I did tab, I would highlight the quotes that I needed. So it was just kind of key scenes. There were some that I didn't tab that I still annotated a little bit and highlighted, but because it is a bigger book, it's not something that I wanted to really go through and analyze every single line. It was more kind of general understanding that I needed to be had, and then annotating key lines and understanding those and relating them to my coursework question. For The Yellow Wallpaper, I did a lot more annotations. This copy actually has The Yellow Wallpaper and Herland in it, so that's why the annotations are only right at the front, because The Yellow Wallpaper is a really short book. When I say that, it is 20 pages long and it literally took me half an hour to read. So how I annotated The Yellow Wallpaper, because I did a lot on this one. I put a bunch of context on the first page in pencil. I think I just did that because I didn't have my iPad on me that day and I wanted to get it done in a free period, so I did the historical context right at the front. I put some key words that I wanted to quote in my coursework right at the front, so epistolary, which is kind of the style of writing almost in the book. And then I did use different color highlighters for this. Obviously this is only helpful if you're doing the Yellow Wallpaper for your coursework, but if you find it helpful. So the different highlighters I used were loss of control over her thoughts and identity, hallucinations / view of the wallpaper, paranoia / view of others' help, the setting of the nursery and the gardens, and other. My question, I believe, was on feminism and how the female was presented. It was something like that. I'll put my question on screen, but if you see how those relate, if not, then I don't know what I was doing, just ignore that. But yeah, so I did a lot more annotating, basically every single page of this book. It is literally jam-packed with annotations. If you can tell, I preferred this book a lot more than my other coursework book. This is actually making me want to reread this. I forgot how much I liked it. But yeah, so that is how I kind of did my annotations for my coursework. In terms of resources you can use for pre-written essays to give you ideas of arguments for your exams, JSTOR is really good. Obviously I said about Lit Charts and Genius for poetry. For my critics, for my coursework books, I will put my sources on screen. I think for these you do really have to look for your own. It's quite difficult because everyone does different texts, but I can't remember if I used any specific websites, but if I did, I will put them on screen now. For my Othello critics, I did use the book that they gave us, which was like the Pearson EdXL critical anthology, but I did use a couple of extra critics which I will put on screen now because they were very, very useful. To memorize your critical quotes, I would recommend using flashcards. I spent a lot of time just rewriting mine out over and over again, and also finding critical quotes that could apply to multiple different themes and sections of the book, play even, just because in the exam it makes it a lot easier to think, okay, this quote works for this, this and this. If this is my question, I can apply it to this. Obviously in the exam you're going to panic. I did that on my prose and freaked out completely, and I ended up getting a lot lower marks on that paper than I originally thought I would. Sometimes panicking can be a bad thing, sometimes it can be a good thing. For my Othello question, it wasn't even Othello. In my drama paper, I think it was on Streetcar, I literally, bear in mind, I have not read Romeo and Juliet, and that's a key point here. I literally started talking about parallels between the opening scene of A Streetcar Named Desire as a tragedy and Romeo and Juliet. So just like generally for exams, try and stick to your structure and your plan. It worked out for me in that case. It didn't work out for me in the prose section because I panicked and completely lost my structure. I ended up getting a B overall in English, which after the prose section I was very happy with, but I was predicted an A. Again, not sure if that's helpful, but just gotta give you the information so you know kind of what you're getting into. But yeah, any extra resources that I can think of I will put on screen now because there's definitely some that I've forgotten. And yeah, that is a breakdown of how I annotated all of my texts for my English Literature A-level and some extra tips. If you have any questions, please leave them below and I will happily answer them, or if you want to DM me on Instagram and ask more questions, go for it, I will happily answer. And if you are doing geography or psychology and want any tips, let me know. I can do a video on maybe geography coursework or just kind of how I revised for it, because geography was my strongest subject and it's what I'm taking at university as well. So yeah, anything you need, just let me know. Yeah, I hope this video was helpful, and please like and subscribe if you want to, if you thought this helped. And yeah, I will see you in another video soon. Bye guys.